Everybody. Today we're going to be speaking with Gary Johnson. He teaches professional selling in the university. He's going to share with us today what he covers in the course and some brief highlights. He's also going to speak about how to deal with a non-team player and, in order to succeed, plan for the end. And next week, we're going to be speaking with Jeff Manning. He's going to speak to us about setting commissions, the biggest mistake a company makes when structuring their team, and do you want a gunslinger or cowboy as a salesperson? Really looking forward to this, and please enjoy this conversation that we have with Gary Johnson.
Startup Sales is a podcast about what it's really like to get a business off the ground. We talk with founders, CEOs, and sales VPs from the high-tech market. You'll learn how to build and scale a sales team. You'll also hear about the growth challenges and tough decisions from others who have had both successes and failures. And now, your host of the Startup Sales Podcast, Adam Springer.
Gary, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Let's start with a short story about how you got into sales.
How I got into sales is probably, well, I won't even say probably, I'll say it's definitely like most people. I fell into it. Came through college, served 8 years in the military as a naval aviator, and decided to leave. And had 2 bachelor's degrees and a master's degree, an MBA, and wanted to do something different with my life, and other than getting into business, didn't really know which functional discipline to pursue. Sales seemed to offer some attributes that I was looking for, and I thought, heck, let's just give it a try. And lo and behold, 25 plus years later, here we are, having learned a lot along the way and made some money here and there as well, and met a lot of great people along the way.
Nice. All right, and you were a general aviator. Does that mean you were a pilot?
I was a naval aviator, so I was a right seater or back seater, as they say it, in weapon systems and so forth and so on. Yes.
What kind of planes?
The Navy's S-3 Viking. We were carrier based. I served off the USS Enterprise, and this was back before the days of the collapse of the Berlin Wall, but we were tasked with finding Soviet submarines in the day during the Cold War, and fascinating time.
Wow, I think that's for another podcast to dive deeper into that.
Sure.
All right. So, what's really interesting that I think the guests should know is that you're actually teaching professional sales at Bentley University.
Yes.
And now this is a full curriculum.
Yes, Bentley is one of universities are coming around to this idea of teaching sales. It was, I think, I'm speaking for the academic community at large, in back in time, but I think it was thought of as more of as a trade skill. But it's certainly become more than that. And Bentley is one of 24 universities that actually offers it as a major. And so there's a full curriculum supporting that major. I teach the foundation class called Effective Selling. And essentially, it's juniors and seniors, some who have chosen the professional sales major, some who have not, but just want to try their hand at sales and learn more about it.
Okay. So, what are you teaching there? What is effective sales?
So I would call it, to the sales professional that's out there in the corporate world, it's essentially a sales 101. We promote the class to the university at large as, look, everyone needs to learn how to sell, whether you're going in accounting or finance or any other discipline. You undoubtedly will be at stages in your career where you will need to sell an idea or a concept or something that you've come up with. And for those of you who think you might like sales, you might want to take this curriculum or at least this class to get exposure to it. Not only, to the basic sales process, which I teach as qualification, gaining interest, discovery, propose, and close, but also to learn the ups and downs of a career in sales. There's many advantages, and of course, there's disadvantages that come along with that, as well as there are with any profession. So it would give the student, great exposure in that way.
Okay. So you're teaching full cycle sales, the full cycle plus also a little bit of emotional support for the salesperson.
Yes, yes, and we break it down to a very role play based, real world scenario based topics and exercises and instruction throughout the class. I have two foundation projects in the class. One is individual based, one is group based. So we start with the individual based project. It's actually something that I pioneered. I have the students on their own raising money for a local charity that I'm very proud of. Over a couple of years, we've raised more than $100,000 for this charity. But what it does for the student is it helps them to understand how to better qualify uh, their 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 prospect, how to approach that prospect with some sort of interscanning statement, how to handle objections, how to do a bit of discovery, how to close, how to follow up, and that sort of thing. And in the group project, here the student learns how to work within a team. uh, I'm a big proponent, largely from my Navy days, in teamwork. And while sales can sometimes be seen as a lone wolf profession, for instance, the high performing sales rep that is in it for himself or herself and in it for the money, and thank you very much, but I'll go do it on my own. We see some of that from time to time. Um, Nevertheless, at the end of the day, when you come back into the corporation, there is the need to exercise a lot of teaming and teamwork skills to bring the final solution to bear. And that typically looks like cross function teamwork, working with others within the sales organization, perhaps relying on a sales engineer and your sales manager, that sort of thing. So the group project is based on the need for strong teamwork, and they're selling a suite of document managing systems to a small enterprise client in this team-based scenario.
I think companies should just send their new hires to this curriculum just to get the training and off board the training.
Well, here's what I think the corporation needs to know, about a new college hire coming from a curriculum like this. Having recruited, hired, and trained countless sales reps over the years, there are a couple of key performance indicators and metrics that we stare at all day long, and they cause a sales manager fits. And that is, finding the right person, the time to ramp, and what it's going to take from you and your organization to get them to ramp quickly. And then, gosh forbid, that awful metric down at the end of the road, attrition. Um, we all know the cost of a bad hire is huge in all organizations for any job function, but certainly if you look at all the hard and soft costs of attrition in the sales ranks, it's big. You've got, let's say, somebody who has some new salesperson who's taken over a relationship with the client, who now no longer is there. It's got to be backfilled. His backfill needs to be explained and ramped back up. You've lost all that investment in training and so forth and so on. So it's attrition in the sales ranks is huge, and it needs to be mitigated. Needs to be mitigated. Yeah. So the corporation looking to hire salespeople can look at a college undergraduate experience in sales as something that will undoubtedly reduce their ramp time once they get on board. That they're finding somebody who has been exposed to the profession of sales and understands its advantages and disadvantages and has decided to, quote unquote, let's say, take the plunge. So there's no guesswork on either side here when that offer agreement is signed. Uh, So the likelihood of attrition coming down, the ramp coming down, and then their overall productivity when they hit the market is going to be increased. And I like to think, I've sold in a variety of industries: software, telecommunications, learning and development, and so forth and so on. We all sell solutions that might tend to decrease a company's costs in a certain area, or increase their productivity in a certain area. This college hire that comes out of a curriculum like this, you're achieving both of those objectives. You're reducing your costs and you're increasing your productivity and your associated revenues. Um, I can't think of a better product to buy, if you will, than that of the new college hire coming from this type of curriculum.
Yeah. Now, what if somebody, let's say I'm a sales manager and I'm looking to hire a new salesperson, and I can't find anybody that's gone to this curriculum before. What are some of the key things that you found, the key indicators that you found that of students that will be successful in their position?
There are several traits, but I would say innately for me in the interviewing process, it's does this person have an innate natural sense of curiosity to and at least a basic foundation of knowledge in how a business operates, and can they ask the right questions? Can they ask a lot of questions? Can they keep the drumbeat rolling, if you will, to be able to learn enough about their client, that the company that they're working with, so forth and so on, to be able to find a potential need or challenge that exists that heretofore may not have been known, um, and upon which they can go on to close on a particular solution. And in that interview, I expect to hear a lot of questions from that candidate. And I can't tell you how many interviews I thought that went well, and throughout the whole interview. And I'm hoping that this will be a good interview and result in a hire, because we all know that the work and energy and time put into interviewing. Only to see at the end of the interview, do you have any questions of us? And they say, well, I've talked with HR, I've talked with that sales rep, I've talked over here. I really think I've got all my questions answered. For me, end of interview. Thank you very much. It's not going to be a good fit. Um,
And what about people though that are nervous, and they just don't have the? It's a stressful time to be interviewed.
uh, I would suggest now. I'm not well. Here has been my experience. If even we all expect a certain degree of nervousness for sure. I'll just add a little bit of a side. One of the people that got assigned to my sales team, I didn't actually hire him. He had a very bad stuttering problem, and when I got him, I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be a lot of work. It turned out, long story short, he turned out to be a very strong sales rep for us, and his stuttering problem didn't mitigate, but he did have the capacity to ask questions and to keep the client engaged. And I probably would pass on that candidate who is suggesting, well, I'm too nervous to ask any questions. In the military, I'll go back to you'll find a lot of references back to my Navy training. Um, you have to fight the way you train, or you have to train the way you fight. I'm sorry. And if you're nervous in a role play to the point where you cannot talk, if you're nervous in an interview to the point where you cannot ask questions, it probably is not an occupation for you.
Absolutely, it is. That's your job. That's your role. That's your whole purpose, is to be asking questions as a salesperson. So no matter how nervous you are, that just means that you need to start at an earlier stage of the process and gain the confidence. So let's talk about the sales cycle itself, and let's start from the beginning. Uh, how do you look at qualifying people before reaching out to them?
Right. Qualification is such a huge and necessary component. Now, where it falls in the sales process is going to vary depending on what that sales role is and how much of that qualification is placed on to the marketing function, um, and so forth and so on. So whether it appears after you've gained interest or before you've gained interest, whether it is on the shoulders of marketing or sales, uh, it's important to make sure that the prospect has the capacity to buy your product or service. And I say that not only from a functional point of view. For instance, perhaps a VP of sales will never buy this type of product, but a director of IT might. But also from a company point of view and size of company and all that. And I would venture to say, if I did a research study on this, if you took the average salesperson's pipeline and looked at those opportunities within the pipeline, if there's slippage, if there's accounts and opportunities that are just stagnant in that pipeline, if you did a better analysis on those opportunities, they're probably not qualified to buy your product. And this is exactly what happened, or was a situation that I walked into when I took one of my assignments a few years back. Um, there was so much stagnant activity or lack thereof within these pipelines. And we went back and took a look at the customers that did buy over the past years. And we came to some conclusions in terms of types of companies, i.e., the vertical that they serve in, um, the job function that typically buys the product or service, how big those companies are by revenue, by number of employees, where those companies are by geography, and whether they are enterprise or small to medium sized businesses, so forth and so on. And when you get to that description of the candidate or the prospect, the company who's most willing to buy, your pipelines start to move. You're spending all of the right time in the right places. Efficiencies go rocket skyward. Um, it's really such a huge step. If you botch that qualification, or if you don't do it to start, you're going to waste an awful lot of time down the road.
Yeah, I see a lot of newer salespeople in the industry that they always overqualify because they're scared to let something go and they're scared to miss an opportunity. And I always try to teach them that, like, look, okay, maybe one in 1,000 you'll miss, but that time wasted on those other 999, you're wasting on the one in 100 that will buy.
Yeah, classic forecast session, Adam, with a sales rep that's not performing and his pipeline is not healthy. How do you know that this particular opportunity is should be in your forecast? Well, if they're really excited about the program, Gary. Really, tell me about that. Oh, they've had 5 demonstrations already, 5 demos. They've brought a new person in every time. They've asked a lot of questions. They ask a lot of questions, Gary. And we look at it and say, well, what's the compelling business reason for buying this product or service? And they start to come up at a loss for that, right? How does this fit, Mr. and Ms. Sales Rep, with our target account profile? Do they or don't they? And you start to come up at a loss for that explanation. So, yes, very, very important to do that qualification step up front.
Yeah, definitely. Either that or they're talking to other salespeople.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, there are, if you take procurement classes and that sort of thing, which I highly recommend any potential sales rep or existing sales rep does. Companies are smart to this. They're training procurement people and other people how to take a sales pitch, if you will, and they will take you on a ride down to nowhere and spend a lot of time with you, and you get nothing in return. So uh, be wary.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a rabbit hole that you could keep chasing down and down. Okay, so now you're qualifying. How do you work the process in as far as keeping momentum? How are you teaching that?
Well, I So well, let's go through. I think the momentum really, if you look at the sales process, it really takes a tipping point or does not take a tipping point at the discovery phase. So you've gained interest with a good interest gaining statement or elevator pitch, as often as described. Um, you get into that discovery session, and what I teach anyway, you've got three objectives in that discovery session, and it may not, especially with the larger enterprise clients, it's not going to happen in an initial discovery session. It's going to happen over multiple sessions, but um, identify that compelling business reason. What is the business reason for considering your product or service? Uh, it's got to be a business reason that's going to help reduce costs or help increase productivity or both. And if you can't demonstrate that, show that, understand that in the context of that company and the environment in which they operate, it's going to be a tough hoe to keep momentum. The second thing is identify your competitive landscape. Uh, so often I get the sales rep who says, "Oh, I'm not competing against anybody." And I kind of stare out the window and look up at the ceiling and I go, I think you're likely wrong on that point. No, 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 they've told me they're not looking at anything else. Well, I don't know any business professional that lasted any sort of time in their role, no matter what it is, that didn't take the due diligence to look at least two solutions for a given business problem or challenge. So, or at least somebody else in that organization is looking elsewhere. So you need to understand who that competitor or competitive landscape is, so that you can, keep the momentum through your sales strategy, whatever strategy you've chosen to pursue, to keep that momentum going. And the third thing is, and just as important, if not more, is the decision making landscape. How are decisions made in this company for products and services like this bought before? Who signed off? Who are key stakeholders? Who are and there's organizations like, I'll give a plug for Miller Hyman right here. They do an awesome job of helping lay out the framework for decision making and who are the players, who are the economic buyers, who are the influencers, who have final authority, and there are good ways, good subtle tactics that can be employed to really understand and truly know that decision making landscape, so that you're tugging on the right strings at the right time, and that momentum continues throughout the sales process. So I hope that answers this.
It does answer the question, but then I think everybody's curious as to what are those tactics to find out that information.
Sure. So the classic example we get back when asked who's the competition. Well, nobody. Well, you should ask. Well, I don't really want to ask because if I bring it up, they're going to go look at somebody else, and I don't want them to look at somebody else. And I thought, well, okay, I understand the concern, but trust me, they're looking at somebody else, and you need to know before you adopt some sort of sales strategy going forward who it is. So, without saying, have you looked at, XYZ company, you might and you should have in your book of knowledge or in your bag of tools a lot of knowledge on your competitor called XYZ company. And let's say that XYZ company, I don't know, let's say, well, because of the recent example of Amazon Prime here, let's say, and let's say Amazon is the company that they're looking at for whatever reason. You might say, are you looking for companies that offer a day in the year where special discounts are provided? Um, and they may say, well, yeah, that's important to us. It's important that, on one day of the year, blah, 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 dot, 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 right? That can lead you down a very narrow path of who actually does that in that competitive space. And so, you can leave that session with a pretty strong level of confidence that, oh gosh, I think they're looking at Amazon or somebody like them. How am I going to compete here?
Why not take the approach of being way more direct and just asking them, not asking them I guess I was just like, my approach is very direct. Who else are you looking? Are you investigating or are you testing?
That's one way to do it. Well, a couple things that I'll have to say on that. So sales is without a doubt, and most things are, but sales for sure is an art and a science. And there's a style element to this too. Um, some of the best sales reps I've known over the years are that direct type of salesperson with a very direct approach, um, kind of an in your face, if you will, type of person. But I've also seen that backfire. It depends, on situation and circumstance and what you're comfortable, living in. Um, I would say this: it's one thing to be direct and say, "Are you looking at Amazon? Yes or no?" And you're gonna get a yes or no answer to that. Um, if you leave it somewhat open ended, however, are you looking at anybody else? Obviously, that's a yes or a no question, so it could be considered closed. But you're gonna get a vague, well, no, not really, because they don't want you to know who else they're looking for, right? So it's okay to be direct if that's commensurate with your style. Um, Make sure though it's the right direct approach that you take so that you get the answer you need.
Absolutely, and be able to read the subtleties.
Sure.
Yeah, because how I would approach it is if somebody says, "Oh no, not really," I would say, "Well, who have you looked at?" Because then that's not a yes no question. It's not closing it off,
Hmm.
and then it kind of forces an answer out of them most of the time.
Sure. Yeah. For instance, this is a document management system we're talking about here. You've bought these, your company's purchased these in the past. The last time you made an effort to purchase a document management system, who were the companies you looked at or looked for, right?
Okay, so now we've talked about qualification. We've talked about keeping the momentum flowing. What about negotiation and closing? What are some of the biggest things that you teach for on this section?
Sure. Yeah. Negotiation is an entire class in my syllabus. Now, I will say too, is negotiation is an entire course at the university I teach in and at many universities. So I am not even going to come close to giving it any justice in the few minutes that we have together here. But it is so, so, so important. Um, One of the role plays that I give it's a fun class, especially if you put this in a role plays to watch how people perform in an uneducated, unaware form of negotiation. I put them in the role of renter and landlord, and it's time for the rent increase because the landlord needs to offset certain cost increases and so forth and so on. The renter is comfortable in their lease, has been for a number of years, and of course doesn't want to pay it. And to see how all that transpires through the course of the role play, we break them up into teams of two and all that sort of thing. It's so, so enlightening to see the types of to see how people react in situations like this. It's all over the map. And of course, for a company to be in their results, to see sustainability, to see scalability, and all that sort of thing, you've got to be sure that your salespeople are taking the proper negotiation stance and tact and using the right tactics and all of that. Um, Personally, I think from a negotiation standpoint, I think knowledge is absolute power. Knowledge is power in a lot of places, but for sure negotiation. And if you don't have that knowledge about your competitor, if you don't have that knowledge about your buyer, you don't have that knowledge about your marketplace and your price points and all of that, um, you're you're going to be behind in that negotiation process from the outset. And so, very important to make sure that you have knowledge. And then, secondly, set a go no go line in the sand, a line in which you will not go behind, you will not back into or back through, and you'd walk before you ever you know, went past that line. So
Okay. Now you say to know the buyer. I think this is something that's key, and I try to teach my team a lot is to put yourself in their shoes, to really not emotionally but mentally to understand what they know, what to try to understand anyways what they know and what they see and what benefits they will need and they have. I think for negotiation, it's really important to understand the other side's perspective.
absolutely, absolutely. And I will tell you this too. I'll put in a plug here for my favorite. You asked earlier, Adam, and it was a good question. What's one of the more important attributes of a salesperson, or is in some way shaped that way in your questioning? And I mentioned asking questions and doing proper discovery. Akin to that is listening skills. And when it comes to putting yourself in the same boat as the buyer, so to speak, listening skills get you there.
Absolutely.
I would argue that most of us, most of the population, most of human society does not know how to listen at all, period. And it's never, ever taught. If you think of the four forms of communication: reading, writing, speaking, and listening, how many years of coursework have you taken in reading and writing and speaking, right? How many courses have you taken in how to listen? Probably, if you're me, none, until you got into until you
I'm definitely there with you.
yeah, and you learn the hard way growing up that if you didn't talk, you didn't get. And so you just talk, talk, talk. Squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? I mean, all of these axioms that you learn growing up, you just learn how to, if you keep your mouth shut and you sit quiet, people are going to roll all over you. Get up and speak your mind, and all the axioms, and so that's what we do. Especially salespeople, give a salesperson an ounce worth of knowledge about your product or service. I guarantee you, then that's all they have. They will go out to that customer and sit in front of them and just we have a saying. I hope it's appropriate for this, but show up and throw up, right? And that's all they do, and it's not gonna get you anywhere. And there is huge productivity gains for the salesperson who really truly understands how to engage in the act of listening, and so we teach it throughout our class.
I think this is one of the most important skills. I mean, you say curiosity, which is definitely there, but it's also the ability just to shut up,
Yes,
especially after asking or giving pricing. I keep telling my team, give the pricing and then just shut up and see what they say. And if there's uncomfortable silence, that means they're uncomfortable too, and it's human nature to want to fill in that void. So they're going to speak.
yes, absolutely, they will. We and one axiom that I like to, that counteracts all these ones we learned growing up. I use the YTYL. You talk, you lose.
Yes.
Period.
Yeah.
Another one I like to share is, let me ask you something. When you came from that appointment, did you feel like you needed a glass of water or a jug of water? uh, well, yeah, I was really thirsty. That's because I was nervous. Well, maybe it was because you were talking too much, you know? And they sit there and they look quizzically at you and they say, yeah, you know what? You're right. I talk too much.
Yeah.
Need a glass of water. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I think this is for me, having this podcast is really allowing me to use those skills and fine tune them, the listening part, because I want to always know what to say next, but then I have to just shut up and listen.
Well, that's the biggest weakness or the biggest trait that leads to this weakness in listening. We listen with the intent of responding, and it's a natural tendency, for sure. It doesn't make you a bad person or anything, but you're in a tennis match and you've just served one over the net, and you're waiting for that return volley, and you're saying, if it's hit over here, I'm going to do this. If it's hit over there, I'm going to do that. That's what your mind is saying to you. And when you're busy calculating that way in your brain, I'm sure some brains have the capacity to do it. I know mine does not. if I'm thinking that way, I'm not thinking about listening to the client. I've just listened to him. Now I'm gonna decide. I've listened enough. Now I've got what I need. Now when he stops talking, this is what I'm gonna say. You know, um, and that's not good listening.
No, not at all. All right. So we've gone through the pretty much the full sales cycle on a very, very high level. I think this is one of the highest levels that you could overview a full sales cycle on. Uh, you said that one of the parts that you teach in the curriculum is teamwork and collaboration. Collaboration. Uh, can you tell me some lessons that you teach or that you cover in that?
Sure. Well, I'll go back to a time when, and again, in my military background and on teamwork and all of that sort of thing. Um, and I almost left sales, to be honest with you, when I first got into it, because I saw around me a total lack of teamwork um, on the part of the individual sales performer. Um, these people were go-getters. They were highly successful in and of their own right, but they were leaving dead soldiers along the side of the road, meaning internal relationships were getting broken. It was a hooray for me, to heck with you type of mentality, and it was disheartening to me, to be honest, at the start. Um, and but I came around and said to myself, in every endeavor that I take on, and when I start to manage and lead sales teams, this will always be a fundamental component. Um, and so I made opportunities available for all of us to engage in teamwork exercises. So there was, and sometimes I need to take my own medicine. We had a teaming exercise at a large corporation. There were probably like 5 or 6 in a team, and there were probably 6 or 7 groups. And the subject of the exercise was a survival exercise where um, you were crash landed in a plane. You were in the Arctic environment. Many who are listening probably have been through a similar exercise, and you're given a list of things that you have left at your disposal as a result of the crash. Matches, one blanket, two forms of rations, so forth and so on. And you're asked through a series of very calculated questions which items to bring, where you're going to bring them. Are you going to leave the crash site? Are you going to travel? Are you going to find a destination? Or what are you going to do here? And I was in this group, and everybody knew my background, and they knew that I had been through numerous survival training exercises as a naval aviator, and too many to mention. And they all sat there and they said, "Well, Gary, you've been through all this before. You just figure it out. Tell us what to do." And I reveled in the attention. And yeah, they're right. I'm the expert here. They're counting on me, which I felt good about. It's always You always feel good when people are counting on you. And I suggested, we do this, we do that, so forth and so on. Well, to get right to the end of the story, our group we turned in a very prominent last place finish amongst the other groups, and it was a very embarrassing and forthright moment for me to learn from. So,
Yeah, ego is a killer.
well, and in other instances, so having learned that, I made sure. Look, collaboration is huge, huge. The human mind, no matter whether it comes from marketing or sales or IT or product development or research and development, the human mind has a lot to give to a subject at hand, or to an opportunity at hand, a challenge at hand. And it's so important to make sure that you glean from all the participants in a situation like that, their input. And I get so frustrated in some of my assignments where I was the VP of sales, and I was the only member of the senior executive team who had grown up in selling. And a sales issue would pop up, and then say, "Well, you're the sales guy, you figure it out," or "You're the sales guy, you make the decision." on, let's say, incentives or spiffs or quarterly incentive program, well, do what you want to do. You figure it out. Well, I'd like your feedback. I'd like your input. Well, that's your role. And it leads to a bit of frustration if you don't get that form of collaboration. So,
Yeah, you need to be able to bounce ideas off of other people and hear sometimes what other people
yep,
think of it.
absolutely.
All right. So if you're teaching teamwork, or you're leading, let's say you're leading a team, and you get this independent contributor that doesn't play well with everybody else, how do you get them to snap into place?
Oh, good question. Um, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them all drink. And that individual contributor who is very comfortable in his own skin or her own skin doesn't want help from anybody else. Doesn't if, As long as he or she is not a detriment to the people around him or her and is fairly self-sufficient, I'll do what I can to. I don't want to say isolate, but to keep that person from having to engage in otherwise teamwork related activities that others need. I don't know if I'm staring around a direct answer there, but um, you've got to you do one thing on motivation, right? I can't motivate you. You are born with a certain level of motivation, or according to psychologists, somewhere around the age of 5 or 6, it became and cemented in you, or it did not. And all I can do as your manager is create an environment around you in which you can excel best at whatever your individual strengths are. And if this is a Lone Ranger type who's very successful, doesn't need a lot of help, doesn't want a lot of help, doesn't want to participate in these stupid teaming exercises like, how do you survive a plane crash? Um, I'm probably going to try to find ways to keep him or her out of it. On the other hand, if he's not finding true success, and or gosh forbid his actions and words are detrimental to the people around him, there will be some, let's say, counseling of a regular basis there.
Yeah, yeah, it's a tough situation to be in. All right, so we're running low on time here, but I want to know, of all the subjects that you're teaching, what is the most beneficial and has the largest impact in the ability to sell uh, in the real world?
There's so many of them. Handling objections, closing techniques. Um, by the way, I'm not a big fan of closing techniques, to be honest. I believe if you perform the sales process the way it should have been performed along the way, if you did everything the best way that you could do it, given what's in front of you and around you, that you don't need closing techniques. The sale will just close on its own. Um, but that's certainly, that's certainly a class within the curriculum. Handling objections is big. Gosh, people don't like to handle objections. It's handling dirty laundry, if you will. But for me, objections are a salesperson's best friend because they tell you if they're real objections, then they may not be real. But if they are real objections, it tells you simply what's in front of you in closing this sale. So that's a big one. But I'll go right back to an already stated topic, and that is listening. Uh, if you don't have the ability to listen, let's look at it this way: the human being's greatest need, outside of sales, outside of all of this, the human being on the face of this planet's greatest need, aside from food, water, and shelter, is the need to be understood. And I asked my class, I said, think about your best friend. Don't tell me who it is. Just think for a moment about your best friend and who is he or she? What are their names? When did you get to know them? And what do you like about them? What do you like about them? And they will all say, if pressed, or they'll volunteer, they'll all say, you know, he or she doesn't often agree with me on certain points and ideas, but he or she understands me. And in terms of building trust with a client, The best way I've found to build trust with a client who has never bought from your company before, never seen your product or service, has never seen you or met you, if you can simply demonstrate a capacity to listen, that person will come around to you and begin to trust you. And when you've got that full level of trust, you're not a salesperson anymore, you're a partner. I guess I'll leave it at that.
Wow. Wow. I couldn't agree with you more, and I couldn't think of a better way to end this conversation. So, Gary, thank you very much for joining us. Is there a way that people could reach out to you?
Sure. Thank you, Adam, for having me too. It's quite a pleasure. Absolutely. You can find me at area code 978-273-5011. Email at gjohnson1234 at comcast.net. And also, of course, I'm on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/linked-in/Gary Johnson 1234. So thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, I'll put my pleasure, and I'll put show notes for your LinkedIn, a clickable address for everybody listening.
Alrighty, Adam. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Startup Sales with Adam Springer. Subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. To contact Adam about consulting services or speaking engagements, visit startupsalespodcast.com or email startupsalespodcast@gmail.com.
All right, Gary, we've got 5 final questions to end things off here. What is your favorite sales or leadership book?
I would say this book transcends both. Good to Great by Jim Collins came out a number of years ago. It's a really, really good read based on a lot of research about successful companies, good to great, how they became good, how they got to great, what the difference is between great and the idea behind this book is, and the idea I like to bring to all of my challenges in the work environment and the home environment, for that matter, simplicity. You know, and a lot of these companies, they focused and delved into very simple key metrics that were an indicator of the business's health or lack thereof. And you can get to those metrics in managing human performance as well. So, Good to Great by Jim Collins.
Okay. Do you have someone that you follow or read for sales or leadership advice?
I like a lot of them. I read a lot of Jack Welch. He's not necessarily just sales, of course, but he's into business performance and all of that sort of thing. Jeffrey Gitomer, his little red book and that sort of thing. They're good pick me ups here and there. He's really good. Hopkins, I remember reading that when I first started out in sales, and it was a good foundation next to the very formal sales training I was getting at the time. So yeah, those would be a few.
Are you available 24/7, or do you have strict personal time boundaries?
Yeah, I 24/7 for sure. And if I can't be now, that's got to be tempered a little bit, right? It's got to have some boundaries available to it. And by the way, society, I think, is pushing us that way hugely. I mean, when you think of I remember a day when the cell phone number was, purposely kept off the business card because the cell phone was just for 24/7 things and your friends and family. And now look at it. I mean, you're not a salesperson unless that cell phone's right there, prominently displayed and on your personal being at all times. So yeah, available 24/7. And if you can't be because it's a vacation, I do truly believe in a work-life balance, and you do need time away. Just as long as you let your constituents know that you'll be unavailable, that's certainly okay. But otherwise, yeah, and it's within reason. If somebody's calling you at 3 a.m. because they can't sleep because an accountant is keeping them up at night, well, guess what? You're keeping me up night too. So misery doesn't always love company at this time of night. So maybe you can save that conversation for 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. But yeah, generally speaking, I think so. Yeah.
All right. What is your favorite tool used for sales?
Oh gosh, the advent of CRM. What a blessing.
So which which CRM tool is your favorite?
Oh, Salesforce.
What one piece of advice do you have for all the founders, CEOs, or sales leaders out there?
Well, I have a couple of things. I would say if well, you know what, it doesn't matter if you're a startup or if you're a somewhat mature business. You've got to we everything we always said in naval aviation, your landing grade depends on your start. So the start is at some point in the landing configuration where you've got that aircraft set up to land correctly. You're on airspeed, you're on altitude, you've got all essential points of the checklist delivered, so that it's likely you're going to have a successful ending. For the start in corporate America, it's recruiting, hiring, and onboarding. And if you don't have that down as a process, if you are willy-nillying that thing, if you've got people in and out of those responsibilities, contract recruiters and and not to demean the work that they do, but if there's no stability in what you're doing here, and if it's not a process, boy, you better make one, and you better fix it, and make it collaborative. Get people in on panel interviews, get multiple perspectives on a candidate, all that sort of thing. There's a saying out there: get the right people on the bus. But you also better have the right people in the right seat. Um, and make sure that onboarding program is there. What are you going to do with that new hire? I would suggest that new hire is making really important decisions about his longevity with your company in those early days. And if he is left to the wolves, to look through the internet, to source his own leads, and to look through, in the old days, the yellow pages, and if he's not getting any training and he's being forced to learn the hard way, and you just stick him with another sales rep or two, he or she's probably not going to last very long. I know that sounds obvious, but I tell you, I've seen it in so many places. So get your recruiting, hiring, and onboarding processes in place, and make sure they're scalable. Would be, a good first start.
Good, good. So hire the right people and train them properly.
Yep.
Gary, thank you very much.
Okay, Adam. Thank you. My pleasure.